My brother copied every purchase I made for years, so I let him copy something that ended up destroying his life. The watch arrived on a Wednesday. I'd been tracking the package for 3 days, refreshing the delivery page obsessively like a kid waiting for Christmas. 8 months of saving. Every freelance design project, every dollar that wasn't rent or groceries, went into an envelope labeled Seiko Fund that I kept hidden in my desk drawer. When the box finally came, I didn't open it right away. Just held it, felt the weight. This wasn't just a watch. It was proof that patience meant something, that discipline actually mattered in a world that seemed to reward immediate gratification and reckless spending. I wore it to Sunday dinner that week. Nobody noticed. The Seiko sat on my wrist through an entire evening of family conversation, and not one person mentioned it. Not my mother when I passed her the potatoes. Not my father when I helped clear plates. Not Otto, who usually had radar for anything new I acquired. The invisibility should have been a warning. Should have told me Otto was planning something. But I was too busy enjoying my purchase to recognize the calm before the storm. 3 weeks later, Otto walked into Sunday dinner, and everything changed. The Rolex caught the light before he even sat down. He moved his arm deliberately, letting the watch flash like a warning beacon, tilted his wrist while reaching for bread, let it gleam when passing the salt, made sure every gesture showcased that distinctive crown logo. Our mother's fork froze halfway to her mouth. Our father leaned forward with an expression I'd seen my whole life, the one reserved exclusively for Otto's accomplishments. Pride mixed with wonder, like my younger brother had just achieved something remarkable instead of buying a watch he absolutely couldn't afford. The Rolex Submariner retailed for $15,000. I knew because I'd researched it after seeing Otto's Instagram post announcing his investment piece. Otto made $38,000 a year as a junior marketing associate at a startup that sold meal replacement shakes to gym bros. The math was impossible. Even if he'd saved every dollar for a year without paying rent or eating food, he couldn't afford this watch. But there it sat on his wrist, gleaming like a trophy awarded for simply wanting something more than the person who'd bought it first. This wasn't new behavior. Otto had been copying me since the day he was born. Since before he could walk or talk, he'd been studying my choices and finding ways to outdo them. When I was 14 and saved 3 summers of lawn mowing money to buy a used Xbox from a kid at school, Otto threw tantrums until our parents bought him the newest PlayStation. Never mind that his grades were mediocre at best. Never mind that I'd earned every dollar through physical labor and mosquito bites and sunburns. Our parents bought him the PlayStation, then took me aside to explain that I needed to be more understanding, that little brothers looked up to their older siblings and sometimes needed help catching up, that family meant supporting each other's successes. When I was 17 and bought my first car, a reliable but unremarkable sedan I'd found on Craigslist for $3,000, Otto launched a campaign of emotional manipulation that lasted 6 weeks. Crying fits, refusals to eat, long speeches about fairness, and how he deserved nice things too. He was 15 and didn't even have his license yet, but our father co-signed for a brand new sports car anyway. Said Otto needed something reliable and safe. Said the used car market was too risky. Said it was an investment in Otto's future. The sports car cost $24,000. Otto crashed it 3 months later while texting and driving. Insurance covered most of the damage. Our parents covered the deductible. Nobody mentioned that maybe Otto shouldn't have had such an expensive car in the first place. The pattern continued through college and into our 20s with increasing venom. I bought a decent laptop for freelance graphic design work, something functional that could handle Adobe Creative Suite without crashing. Otto showed up 2 weeks later with a top-of-the-line MacBook Pro that cost 3 times what mine did. He didn't need it for work. His company provided computers, but he needed one that was better than mine. Needed to post photos of his pristine workspace with the Apple logo prominently displayed. Needed strangers on Instagram to compliment his aesthetic and ask where he got his desk set up. I started dating Julie after meeting her at a coffee shop where she was reading a book I'd recommended to a friend. 3 months into our relationship, Otto was suddenly dating her friend Vanessa, suddenly comparing our relationships at every family gathering, asking Julie pointed questions about our dates so he could plan something more elaborate. When I took Julie to a nice restaurant for her birthday, Otto rented a helicopter to propose to Vanessa over the city skyline. The proposal video went viral. 40,000 views in the first week. Strangers commented about how romantic and thoughtful Otto was, how Vanessa was lucky to have found such an amazing partner. Meanwhile, my quiet birthday dinner got me accused of being boring and unimaginative, but the Rolex felt different, more calculated, more aggressive. Otto kept finding excuses to move his arm during dinner, reached across the table for serving dishes instead of asking people to pass them, gestured while telling stories, made that watch flash from every possible angle like a disco ball at a wedding reception. He was performing, and our parents were his captive audience, asking questions about the watch's features and craftsmanship while completely ignoring the Seiko on my wrist. My mother actually said, "It's so wonderful that you boys appreciate quality timepieces and understand the value of investing in classics that will last a lifetime," as if Otto and I had made equivalent purchases, as if his $15,000 status symbol was remotely comparable to my $300 watch that I'd actually saved for and earned. After dinner, my father pulled Otto into the hallway for what looked like a serious conversation. I couldn't hear the words through the closed door, but body language told the story. Dad's crossed arms and tight jaw, Otto's defensive posture and animated hand movements, palms up in a gesture that said, "What's the big deal?" The discussion lasted maybe 3 minutes before ending with Dad shaking his head and walking away. Otto stood alone in the hallway for a moment, staring at his expensive watch with an expression I couldn't quite read. Satisfaction? Regret? Defiance? Then he noticed me watching from the dining room. His face transformed instantly into a smirk. He raised his wrist in a mock salute before heading back to join the others. Whatever Dad had said clearly hadn't penetrated. Otto remained convinced his choices were justified. His purchases were investments. His lifestyle was aspirational, not reckless. I found out the truth 3 weeks later when my mother called at 11 o'clock on a Thursday night. She was crying so hard I could barely understand her words. Something about the bank, something about Dad's signature, something about $50,000. I drove to their house immediately, finding both parents sitting at the kitchen table surrounded by paperwork, legal documents, loan applications, credit card statements. The financial wreckage of Otto's lifestyle spread across their dining table like crime scene evidence. Otto had forged Dad's signature on a loan application, used their house as collateral to get $50,000 in credit from a predatory lender that specialized in people with bad credit and worse judgment. The Rolex was just the most visible piece of a much larger disaster. Designer clothes that cost more than my monthly rent. Expensive dinners at trendy restaurants that he documented obsessively on Instagram. Weekend trips to Miami and Vegas that he posted about in real time, complete with champagne bottles and hotel suite photos. All of it funded by maxed out credit cards, personal loans from sketchy online lenders, and now outright fraud using our parents' information. My mother was devastated but not angry. That was somehow worse than rage. She was just crushed that her baby boy would do something so reckless, so dangerous, so potentially catastrophic. She kept asking if I'd known about Otto's financial situation, if I could have stopped him somehow, if I'd noticed warning signs that I should have reported to them, as if Otto's spending habits were somehow my responsibility to monitor, as if I should have been tracking my adult brother's purchases and intervening before things reached this point, as if the decades of enabling and excusing his behavior hadn't been the real problem all along. The bank was threatening foreclosure if the loan wasn't repaid within 90 days. 3 months to come up with $50,000 or lose the house they'd owned for 32 years. The house where Otto and I had grown up. The house that held every Christmas morning and birthday party and family dinner of our childhood. My parents didn't have $50,000. Their retirement savings had already been depleted helping Otto with previous financial crises. The sports car accident. The maxed credit cards from college. The security deposit for an apartment he'd been evicted from after not paying rent for 4 months. They'd been bailing Otto out for years, slowly draining their accounts while telling themselves they were helping their son through temporary difficulties. Dad's truck needed replacing. The transmission was failing and repair costs exceeded the vehicle's value. Their roof had leak damage that was getting worse every time it rained. They'd been postponing the repairs because money was tight after helping Otto yet again. Now they were facing losing their home because Otto needed a Rolex. Needed to prove he was successful, even when success was an illusion maintained by stolen money and forged signatures. Mom begged me not to tell Julie about the situation. She was worried about how it would look, worried about family reputation, worried about what people at church would think, worried about everything except actually holding Otto accountable for nearly destroying their financial security. I promised to stay quiet, but the weight of that secret sat in my chest like swallowed stones. Heavy and sharp and impossible to ignore. How was I supposed to go home to Julie and pretend everything was fine? How was I supposed to sit across from Otto at the next family dinner and not scream about what he'd done? How was I supposed to watch my parents lose everything while Otto continued posting Instagram photos of his carefully curated lifestyle? Julie and I had been planning our wedding for 6 months when Otto's copying reached its absolute apex. We'd chosen a small ceremony at Riverside Gardens, a beautiful venue overlooking the water that we'd fallen in love with during our first visit. The venue was booked 18 months in advance, but we'd gotten incredibly lucky when another couple canceled their date. We spent weeks planning every single detail. Julie designed custom invitations with watercolor flowers that matched the garden's landscape. I've been writing personal vows for months, editing and refining them during every spare moment, trying to capture exactly what our relationship meant, what Julie meant to me, how finding her had changed my understanding of what love actually looked like. I kept those vows in a leather notebook that I'd bought specifically for this purpose, worked on them during Sunday dinners when conversation lulled, wrote and rewrote sentences at coffee shops during my lunch breaks, read them aloud in my car to test how they sounded. Otto had seen me writing several times, had asked what I was working on with fake casual interest. I'd told him vaguely about wedding planning without sharing specifics. That turned out to be a catastrophic mistake. I should have known better. Should have remembered that Otto had been stealing my ideas and one-upping my accomplishments for 26 years. Should have protected something as personal as wedding vows the way you'd protect financial information or medical records. Otto announced his engagement to Vanessa on a Monday morning in February. We were exactly 9 weeks from our wedding date. His announcement came via Instagram with professional engagement photos from a shoot that must have cost thousands of dollars. The ring on Vanessa's finger was enormous, easily 3 times the size of Julie's engagement ring. The comments flooded in immediately. Thousands of strangers celebrating Otto's romantic success. Friends and acquaintances and people he'd never met, all posting congratulations and heart emojis. Vanessa posted tearful selfie videos about how blessed she felt, how she'd never expected such an elaborate proposal, how Otto had proven that true love meant grand gestures and no expense spared, how she couldn't wait to spend forever with someone who understood what romance really meant. I watched these posts with growing unease that I couldn't quite articulate. Something about Otto's timing felt calculated, deliberate. He knew our wedding was approaching, knew we were deep in planning mode, knew this was supposed to be our time. His engagement felt less like organic happiness and more like another competitive move in our lifelong rivalry. But I couldn't say that out loud without sounding paranoid, without looking like the bitter older brother who couldn't celebrate his sibling's relationship milestone. so I congratulated him via text and tried to ignore the sick feeling in my stomach. The next Sunday, Otto made an announcement that stopped my heart. He and Vanessa were eloping that following weekend. Not eloping to a courthouse or Vegas chapel. Eloping to Riverside Gardens, our venue, with our photographer, our florist, even our caterer, though an elopement obviously wouldn't need catering the way our 70-person wedding would. Otto explained that Vanessa couldn't wait for a traditional wedding. She didn't want to spend months planning and stressing. They needed to start their lives together immediately. And Riverside Gardens had just had the most miraculous last-minute cancellation. What incredible luck. What amazing timing. My mother beamed across the table and said it must be fate that both her sons would marry at such a beautiful location. Said the universe was clearly blessing our family. Said she couldn't wait to see Otto and Vanessa's ceremony at the gardens before attending ours 9 weeks later. Julie sat beside me with her face drained of all color, one hand gripping mine so tightly her nails left crescent-shaped marks in my palm. She didn't say anything during dinner, didn't object or question or point out how suspicious this all seemed, just stared at her plate while my family celebrated Otto's impulsive wedding plans like this wasn't the most blatant case of sabotage imaginable. The drive home was completely silent. Julie stared out the passenger window while I gripped the steering wheel and tried to process what had just happened. Tried to find some innocent explanation for why my brother would suddenly book our exact venue with our exact vendors for a wedding happening before ours. Maybe it really was coincidence. Maybe the cancellation timing was just incredibly unfortunate. Maybe Otto didn't realize how this would look or feel, but I knew better. 26 years of Otto copying my choices had taught me to recognize his patterns. This wasn't coincidence. This was warfare. Julie finally spoke when we pulled into our apartment parking lot. Her voice was flat, empty. He's doing this on purpose, having your wedding before you, using your venue and your vendors, and probably even elements of your planning. This isn't coincidence. This is Otto being Otto, except this time he's not just copying what you bought. He's stealing what we're building together. I knew she was right, knew it in my bones. But what could I do? Accuse my brother of deliberately sabotaging our wedding. Our parents would never believe it. They'd say I was being paranoid, being jealous, being unable to celebrate my brother's happiness. They'd make me the villain for even suggesting Otto's motives weren't pure. So I said nothing, and Julie's silence stretched between us for the rest of the night, like an accusation I couldn't defend against. She cried herself to sleep while I lay awake staring at the ceiling. Otto had done many things over the years. Copied my purchases, one-upped my accomplishments, made every achievement feel diminished by his immediate escalation, but this felt fundamentally different. This felt personal and malicious in ways his previous copying hadn't been. This was deliberately stealing something that couldn't be replaced or replicated. This was taking the most important day of our lives and making it his dress rehearsal. Otto's wedding ceremony happened on a Saturday afternoon with perfect golden sunlight filtering through the garden's trees. Vanessa looked stunning in a designer dress that probably cost more than our entire honeymoon budget. The venue looked exactly as Julie and I had imagined it would look for our ceremony. Same flowers, same decorations, same setup. It matched our vision so closely that it felt like watching our wedding being performed by understudies, like sitting in the audience while someone else lived our moment. The photographer Otto had hired was the same woman we'd booked first. She recognized me immediately when I arrived and looked visibly uncomfortable when we made eye contact. Several other vendors gave me apologetic glances throughout the event. The florist, the ceremony musician, even the venue coordinator looked guilty. They all knew. Everyone knew Otto had essentially stolen our wedding and rebranded it as his own spontaneous elopement. But no one said anything out loud, because who wants to ruin a wedding with accusations and confrontation? Who wants to be the person who causes a scene at what's supposed to be a celebration? So everyone smiled and played their roles while I stood in the background watching my carefully planned ceremony get performed with different actors. The absolute worst part came during the vows. Otto pulled folded papers from his jacket pocket and began reading in a voice thick with emotion. The first words made my stomach drop so violently I thought I might vomit right there on the garden's manicured lawn. Julie, from the moment I met you, I knew my life would never be the same. Your laugh became the sound I wanted to wake up to. Your smile became the reason I looked forward to each day. He'd said Julie, my fiance's name. Then he caught himself with an embarrassed laugh that sounded completely rehearsed. Sorry, Vanessa. Got nervous for a second there. Let me start over. Vanessa, from the moment I met you, but he didn't actually start over. He just kept reading, and every single word was mine. The vows I'd spent months writing and rewriting and perfecting. The personal stories about learning what love actually meant. The inside jokes that referenced conversations Julie and I had shared. The promises I'd crafted specifically for her. Otto was reading them verbatim to Vanessa, just substituting her name for Julie's in the appropriate places. He'd found my notebook at our parents' house and copied my wedding vows, word for word. He'd stolen the most personal, intimate thing I'd ever written and was performing it as his own heartfelt expression, as proof of his deep emotional connection to Vanessa. Vanessa cried throughout the vows, tears streaming down her face while she listened to words that were never meant for her. The guests dabbed at their eyes with tissues. My mother squeezed my father's hand and whispered about how beautiful and romantic the ceremony was. How Otto clearly had such a way with words. How Vanessa was so lucky to marry someone who could express himself so eloquently. I sat there watching this performance and felt something inside me break. Not just anger, something colder, something calculating. A decision forming that I couldn't quite articulate yet, but knew would change everything. Julie watched the ceremony video that night on social media. Otto and Vanessa had live-streamed the entire event on Instagram, and clips were already going viral. The vows especially. People were sharing them, commenting about how romantic and heartfelt they were, how Otto was clearly an exceptional partner who understood the true depth of commitment. Relationship. Coaches were using his vows as examples of healthy communication. Wedding websites were featuring them as inspiration for other couples. My words were becoming Otto's viral content, his claim to romantic expertise, his proof of emotional intelligence. Julie watched my words coming out of Otto's mouth, and something inside her shattered. She didn't yell or throw things, didn't rage or demand explanations, just sat on our couch, crying silently, while the video played on loop. Then she looked at me with eyes so devastated and broken that I almost couldn't meet her gaze. Those were supposed to be ours. You wrote those for us, for our relationship, for everything we've built together. He just took them like they were his to take, like your feelings don't matter, like our wedding doesn't matter, like we don't matter enough to deserve our own words. We postponed our wedding indefinitely that night. Julie needed time to process what had happened, needed space to figure out if she could still hear those vows at our ceremony, knowing Otto had already performed them for thousands of online viewers. Needed to decide if marrying into a family that enabled this kind of behavior was something she could survive long term. Needed to know if I would ever stand up to Otto, or if I'd keep letting him steamroll over our lives forever. I understood all of it. I was asking myself the same impossible questions. My parents' response to the situation would determine everything. If they recognized how profoundly damaging Otto's actions were, maybe we could salvage something from this disaster. Maybe we could set boundaries and establish consequences and begin repairing the broken trust. If they excused it as harmless sibling rivalry or unfortunate coincidence, Julie and I would need to make much more difficult choices about family contact and what role my parents would play in our future. I called my mother the next morning to explain why we were postponing the wedding, to tell her exactly what Otto had done and how it had devastated Julie, to ask for support in confronting my brother about this escalating pattern of copying and one-upmanship that had finally crossed a line even I couldn't ignore. I needed my mother to acknowledge the harm, to validate our feelings, to hold Otto accountable for behavior that had gone from annoying to destructive. My mother's response crushed whatever hope I'd been desperately holding on to. She said I was overreacting to a harmless mistake, that Otto hadn't meant any harm by using similar vows. That imitation was the sincerest form of flattery, and I should be honored my brother admired me enough to want to use my words at his own wedding. Honored. She actually used that word, as if plagiarizing my wedding vows and performing them at a ceremony using our vendors at our venue before our scheduled date was some kind of compliment, some kind of tribute to my writing skills, rather than a calculated act of theft and sabotage. When I pointed out that Julie was devastated and felt like our wedding had been stolen, Mom sighed heavily like I was being incredibly difficult. She said Julie needed to be less sensitive about these things, that weddings were stressful for everyone, and we shouldn't let minor issues derail our plans to spend our lives together. Minor issues. My brother had systematically copied and stolen every element of our wedding, including the most personal vows I'd ever written, and my mother was calling it a minor issue. That's when I realized with complete clarity that nothing would ever change. Otto would continue copying and escalating and destroying because our parents would continue excusing and enabling his behavior no matter what damage he caused. The breaking point came 3 weeks later during another Sunday dinner that I attended alone. Julie had stopped coming to family gatherings after the wedding theft. She couldn't stomach watching my parents celebrate Otto's accomplishments while completely ignoring his destructive behavior. She couldn't sit at that table and pretend everything was normal. So I went by myself, playing the role of supportive family member while internally calculating how much longer I could maintain this charade before it destroyed my relationship with Julie completely. Otto was showing off vacation photos from his Bali honeymoon. Vanessa had posted them throughout their trip in real time. Stunning images of infinity pools and private beaches and couples massages at luxury resorts. The honeymoon had clearly cost tens of thousands of dollars. Money Otto absolutely didn't have after the loan fraud and maxed credit cards. But he'd done it anyway because that's what successful people did in his mind. They took extravagant honeymoons and documented every moment for social media validation from strangers who would never see the debt collectors and foreclosure notices waiting back home. My father asked how Otto had managed to afford such an expensive trip. A reasonable question given the family's recent discovery of Otto's financial disasters. Otto smiled that practiced smile and said he'd gotten an incredible deal through credit card points and rewards programs. An obvious lie to anyone paying attention. But our parents just nodded and accepted the explanation without pushing further. They didn't want to know the truth. Didn't want to face that their youngest son was spiraling into deeper financial catastrophe while maintaining this Instagram-perfect facade that would inevitably collapse. Then Otto brought up our postponed wedding with fake concern that made my hands clench under the table. He asked when Julie and I had rescheduled our ceremony. Said he hoped we weren't letting cold feet derail our plans. Said marriage was a big commitment, and it was normal to feel nervous. The implications were absolutely clear. He was suggesting that Julie and I were having relationship problems, that our postponement wasn't about his actions but about some fundamental incompatibility between us, that maybe we weren't actually ready for marriage. My mother immediately took the bait, asked if everything was okay with Julie and me, if we were having doubts about the relationship, if we needed to talk to someone about pre-wedding jitters or couples counseling. Otto had successfully redirected the entire narrative, turned his theft into our failure, made himself the concerned brother instead of the cause of our postponement, and our parents bought it completely, because that's what they've been doing for 26 years. I left dinner early that night with a clarity I hadn't felt before, a cold certainty about what needed to happen. Otto would never stop copying me, would never acknowledge his pattern, would never face consequences for behavior that had been escalating for decades. Our parents would never hold him accountable, because doing so would require admitting they'd enabled and excused his destructive choices for his entire life. If I wanted this nightmare to end, I needed to make it end myself, not through confrontation or family therapy or any conventional solution. Those had all failed repeatedly over years of trying. I needed to give Otto exactly what he wanted in a way that would finally expose the true cost of his copying. I needed to set a trap he couldn't resist, something that looked like spectacular success on the surface, but hid catastrophic consequences underneath. Something that would hurt him the way he'd been systematically hurting me for years. The idea felt dark and vindictive. It felt like becoming someone I'd never wanted to be. But I was past caring about being the bigger person. Being patient and understanding and forgiving had gotten me absolutely nowhere, except watching my wedding get stolen and my vows get plagiarized and my relationship pushed to the breaking point. The house appeared on the market on a Thursday morning in March. I found it through a realtor friend who specialized in distressed properties and difficult sales. She called me directly instead of sending the listing. Said she had something interesting I might want to see. Her voice had a strange quality when she described it, like she was offering me something slightly illegal. The house was a beautiful colonial, with incredible curb appeal. White picket fence, mature oak trees providing shade across a manicured lawn, updated kitchen visible in the listing photos with granite countertops and stainless appliances, the kind of starter home young couples dreamed about, the kind of property that would photograph beautifully on social media, the kind of house that would make friends jealous and family proud. It looked absolutely perfect, and that was the problem. The house had been on and off the market for 18 months with multiple inspection failures and collapsed deals. The current owners were desperate to sell before their mortgage went into default. They'd invested thousands in strategic staging. Fresh paint everywhere to cover water stains and mold spots. Furniture carefully placed to hide damaged floors and cracked walls. Professional photos taken from angles that made problems invisible. Everything designed to create an illusion of perfection that would collapse the moment anyone looked closely. My realtor friend showed me the inspection report from the last failed sale. The document was horrifying. Foundation cracks throughout the entire basement with evidence of ongoing water intrusion. Black mold growing inside the walls where previous water damage had never been properly remediated. Termite damage in the load-bearing beams that had gone unchecked for at least 5 years. A drainage problem that caused the basement to flood with any significant rain. The repairs would cost at minimum $100,000, possibly double that depending on what else contractors discovered once they started opening walls and floors. But from the outside, from the carefully staged interior shown in listing photos, the house looked perfect. Exactly the kind of property Otto would covet. Exactly the kind of purchase he'd need to make before I did. I started planning my performance immediately. Sunday dinner became my stage. I showed my parents the listing photos on my phone with carefully rehearsed enthusiasm, mentioned that Julie and I had driven past the house multiple times, described the neighborhood and school district and commute times with genuine excitement, told my mother it was our absolute dream house, the perfect place to start our married life and eventually raise children, made sure Otto overheard every single word, made sure he saw me looking at the photos repeatedly, made sure he understood this was something I desperately wanted, something I was actively pursuing with serious intent to purchase. I created urgency by mentioning other interested buyers, said the house probably wouldn't last long on the market at this price point, said we were trying to get pre-approved for a mortgage, but the paperwork was taking longer than expected. I performed visible frustration and desperation, let Otto believe this house was slipping through my fingers due to boring adult complications like loan processing times and financial documentation. I was careful never to oversell it, never to sound too enthusiastic or too obvious. Just the right amount of genuine interest mixed with practical concerns about affordability and timing. The trap worked faster than I'd even anticipated. Otto started asking pointed questions about the house immediately, wanted to know the exact address, the listing agent's contact information, how much we were planning to offer, whether there were really other buyers competing for it or if that was just pressure from the agent. I acted reluctant to share details, which only intensified his interest, made him want it more. Finally, I showed him the full listing during a family dinner, making a deliberate show of scrolling through photos while sighing about how perfect everything looked, about how this was exactly what Julie and I had been searching for. Otto's eyes locked onto my phone screen with that familiar acquisitive hunger I'd seen 1,000 times before. I could practically watch his brain calculating, processing, figuring out how to get this house before I did, how to turn my dream purchase into his superior accomplishment, how to once again prove he could have everything I wanted, but better and sooner. I left the dinner without mentioning the house again, knowing Otto would immediately start investigating, would find the listing online, would see that attractive price and those beautiful staged photos, would convince himself this was the perfect opportunity to one-up me again. 2 days later, Otto called the listing agent. I knew because the agent was my friend, the one who'd shown me the inspection report and agreed to help execute this trap. She told Otto the house had significant interest but was still available, mentioned casually that the previous buyers had backed out after their inspection, which should have been a massive red flag. But then she added that some buyers were waiving inspections entirely to make their offers more competitive. Used that detail to suggest that inspection might not be necessary for serious buyers who wanted to move quickly, for buyers who understood that great deals required bold action. Otto scheduled a showing for that Saturday. Brought Vanessa. They walked through the house in less than 30 minutes. Didn't look closely at anything. The staging worked exactly as designed. Fresh paint covered water stains so well they were invisible without close examination. Furniture strategically hid damaged floorboards and cracked drywall. The basement had been professionally dried and cleaned just enough to pass casual observation. Everything looked perfect to people who were too excited about the price and location to actually investigate what they were buying. Otto made an offer the next day, full asking price. Waived inspection to make the offer more attractive. The sellers accepted within hours. They'd been trying to unload this disaster for over a year, watching buyer after buyer discover the problems during inspection and walk away. Otto had just given them exactly what they needed. A naive buyer, too eager to compete with his brother to do basic due diligence. Otto called me that evening. His voice was practically vibrating with excitement and barely concealed condescension. Hey, remember that house you and Julie couldn't afford? The one you kept going on about at family dinners? I just closed on it. Well, made an offer that was accepted immediately. Looks like it was meant for me instead of you. You should probably start looking for something in a more realistic price range. Something that matches your actual budget. His tone dripped with that familiar superiority he'd perfected over decades of one-upmanship. I congratulated him with carefully calibrated surprise and disappointment in my voice. Told him that was great news. Asked a few questions about his financing and closing timeline. Never mentioned the foundation cracks, the black mold, the termite-damaged beams, the flooding basement, the $100,000 in repairs he'd be discovering soon. Just wished him well, and hung up. Then I sat in my car for 10 minutes feeling something between satisfaction and horror at what I just set in motion. The first month after Otto moved in was eerily quiet. He and Vanessa posted constant photos of their beautiful new home, carefully staged shots of them cooking together in the updated kitchen, Vanessa doing yoga in the spacious living room with morning light streaming through the windows, Otto working from home in what he grandly called his office, every image carefully curated to project success and domestic bliss. Hundreds of comments praised their adulting skills, their smart investment, their beautiful starter home that would surely appreciate in value. Friends asked for house hunting advice. Strangers wanted to know their secret for finding such a great deal. Otto absolutely soaked up the attention like always, every like and comment validating his choice, proving once again that he'd made the better decision, that he'd beaten me to something I wanted, that his life was more successful and enviable than mine. For 32 days, his Instagram was a highlight reel of homeowner triumph, and I watched every post knowing what was coming, knowing the countdown had started, knowing the trap was about to spring. Then the rain came. Not even a major storm, just steady rain for 6 hours on a Monday afternoon in April. Normal spring weather, the kind of rain that shouldn't cause any problems for a house with proper drainage and foundation integrity. Otto called me at midnight, panic making his voice crack and shake. His basement was flooding, water pouring through cracks in the foundation that apparently hadn't been visible during his 30-minute walkthrough. Everything they'd stored down there was being destroyed. Boxes of belongings, holiday decorations, furniture they'd been saving for when they could afford to furnish the upstairs bedrooms, all of it floating in 3 inches of water that was rising every minute. He wanted advice, wanted me to come help, wanted me to somehow fix a problem that was unfixable without massive structural repairs. I let his calls go to voicemail throughout the night, listened to his increasingly frantic messages while lying in bed next to Julie, each message more desperate than the last, more panicked, more confused about how this could possibly be happening to his perfect dream house. Julie looked at me in the darkness and whispered, "Is this because of what he did to us?" I didn't answer. Didn't need to. She understood completely what was happening and why. The next morning, Otto called a waterproofing company. They came out and gave him an estimate, $15,000 for exterior waterproofing and drain tile installation. But that wouldn't actually fix the foundation cracks causing the flooding in the first place. For that, he'd need structural repairs. A different contractor came out that afternoon, walked through the basement, examining the cracks with a flashlight, took measurements, asked questions about how long Otto had owned the property and whether he'd had an inspection done before purchasing. The structural engineer's estimate came the next day, $45,000 for foundation repair work. They'd need to excavate around the entire exterior foundation, install support beams, fill the cracks with specialized epoxy, reinforce problem areas with steel rods. The work would take at least 3 weeks, and the house would be essentially unlivable during that time. Otto's voice was shaking when he called to tell me about the estimate. Asked if I knew anything about foundation problems in that neighborhood, if I'd heard anything about issues with houses from that era, if I had any advice about contractors or financing options. I reminded him gently that I'd never even gotten inside the house to see it, that he'd bought it so quickly I never had a chance to tour the property myself, pointed out that he'd waived the inspection, which was his choice and his responsibility, suggested maybe he could get a second opinion on the repair costs, offered sympathies while feeling absolutely nothing except cold satisfaction that consequences were finally arriving. Week 2 brought the mold discovery. Vanessa started having respiratory problems out of nowhere, persistent coughing that got worse at night, wheezing when she tried to exercise, constant sinus pressure and headaches. She couldn't figure out what was causing these sudden health issues. A specialist suggested environmental factors, recommended testing their home's air quality for allergens or toxins. They hired an environmental inspector who spent 3 hours testing various rooms and taking samples from walls. The results came back showing toxic black mold throughout the house, growing inside the walls where previous water damage had been painted over instead of properly remediated, thriving in the dark, damp spaces behind the fresh paint, and staged furniture. The mold had been there for years, slowly spreading, slowly releasing spores that were now making Vanessa sick. Remediation would require gutting walls in multiple rooms, removing all the insulation, professional cleaning with specialized equipment and chemicals, then replacing everything that had been removed, another $30,000 minimum, possibly more, depending on how extensive the growth was once they started opening walls. Otto called our parents begging for financial help. They had nothing to give. They'd already spent their last reserves bailing him out of previous disasters. Sports car accident, the maxed credit, cards, the forged loan that had nearly cost them their house. They were tapped out, exhausted, unable to keep rescuing their youngest son from problems he kept creating for himself. Dad told Otto he was on his own this time, that he needed to figure out how to handle adult problems like an adult, that maybe this would teach him about the importance of due diligence and not making impulsive decisions just to compete with his brother. The termite damage revealed itself during the mold inspection. The environmental inspector noticed sagging in one of the ceiling beams and mentioned it to Otto, suggested having a structural engineer look at it. The engineer came back out and did a more thorough examination, found extensive termite damage in the load-bearing beams in the basement, years of unchecked infestation, thousands of termites slowly eating the wood that held up the entire house. The damage was so severe that the beams needed to be completely replaced. They'd have to support the entire house with temporary beams, while removing and replacing the damaged wood. At least $50,000, maybe more, depending on what they found once they started the work. Otto's dream house was becoming a nightmare that grew worse with every inspection. Every contractor gave estimates he couldn't possibly afford. Every solution required money he absolutely didn't have after maxing out credit cards and taking fraudulent loans. The foundation needed $45,000. The mold remediation needed $30,000. The termite damage needed $50,000, plus the initial $15,000 for waterproofing. He was looking at minimum $140,000 in repairs for a house he'd paid $220,000 to purchase. Otto showed up at my apartment on a Saturday morning, 6 weeks after moving into his disaster house. He didn't call first, didn't text, just appeared at my door at 8 in the morning looking like someone who hadn't slept in days. His clothes were wrinkled and dirty, dark circles under bloodshot eyes, hair greasy and unwashed. He stood in the hallway staring at me without speaking for at least 30 seconds. I could see him trying to formulate words, trying to figure out what to say. Finally, he spoke. His voice was completely flat, defeated in a way I'd never heard from him before. You knew about that house and what was wrong with it. You did this deliberately. You set me up. The accusation hung in the air between us. I could have denied it, could have played innocent, could have pretended to be shocked by his suggestion, but I didn't. I just shrugged and looked him directly in the eyes. I never got inside that house to see anything. I just looked at listing photos like you did. You're the one who bought it. You're the one who waived the inspection. You made your own choices, Otto. Just like you've been making choices to copy everything I do for 26 years. Just like you chose to steal my wedding, venue, and my vows. This was all you. He stared at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Shock? Betrayal? Recognition that he'd finally gone too far? Then he turned and walked away without another word, left me standing in my doorway watching his slumped shoulders disappear down the hallway. I closed the door and leaned against it. Felt nothing except empty satisfaction that consequences had finally arrived after decades of Otto facing nothing but rewards for his terrible behavior. 3 months after buying the house, Otto and Vanessa's marriage was in shambles. She was still sick from mold exposure, still angry about being trapped in an unlivable house they couldn't afford to fix or sell. Her parents had hired lawyers, started asking questions about whether Otto had committed fraud by misrepresenting the house's condition, whether Vanessa had grounds for annulment based on financial misrepresentation. The relationship imploded under the weight of disaster after disaster. Otto filed for divorce 4 months after his viral wedding ceremony. Vanessa wanted out immediately, wanted her name removed from all the paperwork, wanted distance from the financial catastrophe that was drowning them both. The divorce was brutal and expensive. Lawyers fighting over who would take responsibility for the house, who would handle the repair costs. Neither of them wanted it. The property was underwater financially, worth far less than what they owed on the mortgage after accounting for all the necessary repairs. They'd never recover their investment. 6 months after buying his dream house, Otto moved back into our parents' basement. The house sat empty. The bank was threatening foreclosure. Repair estimates now totaled over $200,000 after contractors discovered additional problems with plumbing and electrical systems. Otto told everyone who would listen that I'd deliberately set him up, that I'd tricked him into buying a disaster property because I was jealous of his success. But he sounded like a broken record playing the same excuse over and over. Nobody really believed him. They'd all watched him make impulsive decisions for years. Watched him copy my choices without thinking. Watched him prioritize competition over common sense. Our parents tried defending him at first. Called me asking why I hadn't warned Otto about potential problems with houses in that neighborhood. Suggested I should have been a better brother. Should have helped him with due diligence instead of letting him make such a catastrophic mistake. But even they couldn't ignore the pattern anymore. Couldn't pretend Otto's disasters weren't the direct result of his own choices. Decades of copying me. Always trying to one-up me. Always needing something bigger and better and more impressive. This time, his copying had destroyed his marriage, his credit, his financial future. Julie and I rescheduled our wedding for the following spring. Found a different venue that Otto didn't even know existed. I wrote completely new vows. Personal words that hadn't been stolen and performed. Words that belonged only to us. We got married surrounded by people who actually cared about us. People who celebrated our relationship instead of trying to compete with it. Otto wasn't invited. Neither were our parents after they suggested multiple times that we should forgive him and move past this family conflict. Some betrayals don't deserve forgiveness. Some patterns don't deserve another chance. Some people need to face the full consequences of their actions without anyone swooping in to rescue them. Otto had spent 26 years copying me, stealing my ideas, one-upping my accomplishments, making every achievement feel meaningless. He'd stolen my wedding and my vows. He destroyed my relationship with my parents by forcing me to choose between enabling his behavior or protecting my own sanity. Otto still lives in our parents' basement 3 years later. Works retail because no professional job will hire him after background checks reveal the lone fraud conviction he eventually pled guilty to. His Instagram is private now with just 43 followers. No more posts about luxury purchases and aspirational lifestyle. No more viral wedding videos or vacation photos from Bali. Just quiet existence in the wreckage of choices he made trying to prove he was better than me, better than everyone. The house eventually went through foreclosure, sold at auction for $90,000, less than half what Otto had paid. The new owners are slowly making repairs, fixing the foundation and the mold and the termite damage, turning the disaster back into something livable. Otto's credit is destroyed for at least 7 years. His marriage is over. His reputation in our family and social circle is permanently damaged, all because he couldn't stop copying, couldn't resist competing, couldn't see the trap I'd set until it had already destroyed everything he'd built on stolen foundations. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.